Hello, my amazing and supportive All Things Montessori community. Wow, I was just reflecting as I was editing this week's podcast that it is our 2-year anniversary this month of All Things Montessori. I truly can't believe that it started 2 years ago. Well, it actually started like 2.5 years ago because Jamie and I recorded without releasing anything for a long time until we felt like we were ready. But wow, it's just been an amazing journey over 2 years, and I can't thank you guys enough for being here for it. You know, we've been putting a lot into this podcast, and now that I'm doing most of it solo, which has been great. It's just I'm so grateful for the support of this community. I've been feeling a little all over the place this month because my husband and I just relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina. And I mean, I'm so happy to be here, but the change has just completely washed over me in a lot of overwhelming ways. And so knowing that this community is strong and rooted and still listening has been a real sense of comfort over this month. So just thank you guys so much. I really just, from the bottom of my heart, I love this community. I love making this podcast. I love putting this out there in the world because when I was a teacher in the classroom, I felt really, I felt alone. I felt like I didn't really have anyone to turn to at times. And even though I did have people to turn to, it felt pretty isolating. So I just am so grateful. I'm so excited about this episode today. I have Kim Smith with me. Kim Smith is an amazing human being. She is the founder of Learning Beautiful, which is a Montessori company that makes computer science materials. But get this, they don't use technology to make them. It's such a fun interview to talk about this part of Montessori that's really new and something that I don't know a lot about. So I really hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by all of our patrons. Thank you all again for being patrons. I really am so grateful to have that community to help me create the podcast. Even though podcasting seems like it should be something that you do that doesn't cost any money, it does. There's equipment, there's subscriptions, there's all these sorts of things that I need to pay for. So anything that is contributed just like really, really helps me make this podcast possible. If you want to become a patron, you can just follow the link below, or you can head on over to patreon.com. It's super easy. There are 3 tiers that you can join. And again, it's a pandemic. It's a lot. If you can't donate anything, it's not a big deal. Like, it's whatever. I appreciate any donation, and thank you guys so much. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Sapling Supply, 2 Montessori dads making Montessori furniture. How wholesome is that? They're also the coolest guys. I had a great episode interviewing both of them. It was so fun to talk to them about it. So you can check out that episode and also check out Sapling Supply, and you can get 10% off using our promo code ATM10 if you're looking to outfit your Montessori at home environment. Perhaps you need something for the classroom, anything, go check it out. It's fantastic. And without further ado, I really hope you enjoy this episode with Kim Smith, all about learning beautiful. Well, I'm so delighted today to have a friend with me from across the country out in Portland, Oregon. But we're, of course, recording virtually. I have Kim Smith here. She's the founder of Learning Beautiful, which is an amazing material making company that makes computer science Montessori materials without using technology, which seems just absolutely impossible and amazing to me. But I'm so excited to have her here. Kim, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So it's my favorite question that I get to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. What is your Montessori story? What brought you to the wonderful world of Montessori?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's kind of odd to say, but I think I was a bit late to come to the Montessori scene. And my first exposure really wasn't until I was at MIT, and I was a researcher there, and then later did a master's program. But we were investigating some research into early childhood education and trying to create new models for reaching children at that age, primarily through new school systems. And so we were doing a bunch of research, and our PI was very excited about Montessori and was kind of taking upon himself to research what he wanted to do as a father and the gifts he wanted to give his child. And Dr. Montessori's work became really influential for that process. And so, we were in this lab group and we were trying to create, different kind of approaches for education. And so Montessori became a huge part of what we were learning. And we brought in Montessori experts who led little workshops with us. And we pretty much treated it like Montessori school for adults. And we started our first school, and then I spent a year in that classroom, and it was really intense and exciting for me. But that was my time to understand how the environment was set up, the role of the teachers in that space, but also how the children came to and experienced learning.
So coming to it later, I mean, I came to it later too. I didn't know what Montessori was till I was like 26. Isn't it kind of crazy that you don't know about it? And once you know about it, you're like, what?
Yeah, it really is. And I'm very happy and grateful for my childhood, but I had such a different education system, like very, traditional in so many ways. And so for me, it was really just unlocking some things that felt so obvious in a lot of ways, and also empowering. And I was just really excited about it. And it really influenced a lot of the way I think about learning as an adult as well.
Oh yeah. When you said Montessori school for adults, I completely understand that, because I think I relearned so many basic things that I didn't know or never really fully understood. Like long division is my favorite example. I truly didn't know how it worked until I worked with the Montessori material, blocks and tubes, and it completely blew my mind. And it's so cool. It's such a cool foundational learning, you really get the bare bones of it. That is so interesting. So when you were in the classroom, a Montessori classroom, what age group were you working with?
Yeah, so this was 3 to 6, but all of the children were 3 or 4 to start. And there was a group of 10, and those were our first children and families, and they were amazing. I had experience teaching some college and high school and junior high. But this was like a whole nother world for me.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. 3 and 4-year-olds. Yeah. It's all their world and we're just living in it, basically.
Yeah. I love that.
So to talk about your amazing company, I would love to know how Learning Beautiful came about. So how did we get to computer science Montessori materials?
Right. That's a great question. Well, I think, in general, I've been really blessed with just kind of stumbling upon great things as I go. And I think that, I've always sort of had a direction and a passion, and then kept kind of an open mind about where that could lead and the changes that could come up on that path. And it's kind of a Montessori idea, but all that to say, I finished my MFA. I was in New York, and I ended up getting a position at the MIT Media Lab, kind of as an artist in this lab, to work with Sepp Kamvar, who's the founder of Wildflower Schools. Right. And, started up this new lab, and I was one of the first members, and I ended up moving there to work in the Media Lab, doing art projects. And, I had done some work in education and was interested in that. And as a group, we started to look into small scale interventions that we could do kind of in the community level, but that could be replicated in order to affect large scale change. So for example, this would be small scale agriculture or small scale education practices or transportation, things that feel small, but because they exist in that community level can be replicated and have big change. And so we were, working on the education, early childhood. And the reason we really did it was because Sepp had a 3-year-old and he couldn't find a school for him. And And so I think that was kind of the great idea in my time there, moving away from being in such a different environment in fine art to coming somewhere where people were using tools and technology and were actually incredibly creative. And I mean, in the sense that they would envision something that they wanted to exist, and then they would kind of make it and go out and do it. And there was just a real excitement to be had, and you kind of get a little bit excited about it, and it's contagious. And so we started this school, and my co-founder, who was amazing, Jonathan Cohen, his background is in architecture. And so we came from this design standpoint, and and after spending a year in the classroom, we're just like, wow, like this is amazing. All of it is amazing. This whole system complete and together, but also seeing the design aspects of the materials and how beautiful they were, but also just the sophistication in their design, their, lack of clutter and extraneous details, their simplicity. And there was just a kind of wholeness to them that we really appreciated. And, it was a really simple idea. We just thought, well, this is like this older pedagogy that's from a certain time. And, Dr. Montessori, we're like, getting very deep into this space and understanding her approach as a scientist to responding to the world around her. And I just thought, what can we contribute here that has changed? And so we made all sorts of materials. We'd have these hackathons and bring in all sorts of Montessori people and other people. And, we had a machine shop so we could put together things really quickly and make these materials and then put them in the classroom. And so that's when we started playing around with the idea.
As I'm sure your time in the classroom showed you, there is such a dynamic, I don't really know the right word. The Montessori classroom is so unique and the materials are so unique because the design is so precise. The design matters so much. Like every single, they're all scientifically correct. They're precise. They're minimal. They're beautiful. I was really blown away as like a student when I started studying Montessori at how important that was. Right. And it really does make a difference. And it's completely translated into my life now, but everything really matters where you put it in the classroom, how it's done, how it's cleaned, how it's, it's all about like that respect and that, yes, you're 3 years old, but I respect your education enough that I want you to work with this beautiful material that you could break. And it's, but it's still that beautiful respect. So that is so fascinating. So what was the first material that you guys made or that you were sort of excited to get out there?
Yeah, I remember one day we had a hackathon and we made like 10. And I think I made something about the color wheel and these discs that aligned.
Yes.
I think there was a physics one with a fulcrum points. And there was a couple computer science ones. I think one of the early ones was the binary tree. And then
that's so beautiful too.
Yeah. And then we kind of just threw them in the classroom because by then we had started these schools and we had at least one. And then shortly after that, another one. And so they were set up as lab schools and they would test them out. So I think those were some of our first ones that I can remember, but there was a lot. Some were terrible.
Well, Maria Montessori herself was always, that's what she was doing. Like her schools were basically a lab school because she was just testing stuff out. And a part of testing that out is some of it doesn't work.
Yeah. You have to be like humble enough to recognize it too. And there's lots of, we kind of identified where those points of failure were. Like the child interested in it. It's too complicated. It's not scaffolded. The teacher's like, I don't understand this. There's all sorts of
all kinds of components. So, what kind of responses, we can talk about the positive ones, or whatever. What kind of responses did you get from the children with these materials?
Yeah, and then after we kind of played around really high level, that's when we decided to zero in a little bit more on computer science. That's when we started to make, our cardboard prototypes now had like wood and things like that. And yeah, that's kind of an interesting point too, because sort of the level of completion and the integrity of the physical aspects of the materials really matters. So it was kind of hard to have prototypes that weren't perfect, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. It's a little, what's the right word? It's vulnerable. Like you're putting something out. That's not correct. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And if there's any kind of like technical failures or design things, that's where you can drop off or lose the children. But, it was actually really cool. They responded really, really well to it. And,
love that.
Some more than others, and the ones that they responded to more and were really deeply engaged with, and the teachers were excited about, those were the ones we cultivated a bit more. And they went through, hundreds of iterations or whatever. And we would, I kind of spent a lot of time observing and what that means too, because, we were coming from it too, where people kept saying like, we want to monitor the engagement. And there was another project in our lab that was trying to do that. And just simply watching and observing was really fascinating, because you start to understand what does that mean to like create something that actually takes a child on a path where they're captivated and they're learning something. And that's not always obvious, and it looks different for every child. Sure. And so it's just a matter of taking these notes and understanding where we could come in to make any kind of change to help facilitate that process, whether it's like, this piece needs to be a little bit smaller so it fits into the hand better, or, these pieces aren't fitting in the correct way, or, how can we simplify this so we're actually breaking down the steps even more?
Wow. Yeah. And knowing that it's okay to fail, and then being able to observe and then change it. It's such a simple thing, but that was one of the hardest things for me as a teacher. It's also one of the hardest things for me as a person, like, putting yourself out there, really trying something, and then, it's just not quite right, but having the, the courage and faith in yourself that you could do it. That's so interesting. And I love that you brought up observation, because that's how we learn anything, especially in Montessori, is just watching, like the detail you say about it not fitting in the hand correctly, or, they're not responding to it because it's too big or it's too clumsy, or who knows, or it should be this color instead of this color. That is so important. And I love the care that goes into that, because that means that when it does work, it will facilitate learning, because Montessori materials, they're so fascinating, but it's not like you give a child the material and then they're learning it right there. Like it's a pathway, exactly what you said. Like it's going to get them there. We don't know when. So it's such a hard thing to gauge, but observation is that's it. That's it.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a beautiful concept.
Oh, that's so cool. So where is Learning Beautiful now? Do you, how many materials do you guys have? Like what's going on with it right now?
Yeah. So we spun out as a company in 2017. Okay. So this was then my master's research, and that just meant getting very specific about what the curriculum was. So we spent that time, that kind of R&D, to work with computer scientists to figure out how we were going to define that curriculum. And I think that's something that I'm actually spending a bit of time on now as we're developing new materials. So I think of the ones that we have now, there's I don't know, like 10-ish, that are the first foundations in this series of
That's a lot. Like if I think about some of the sections in Montessori, there are a lot of materials, but 10 is a good chunk. That's pretty.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy how much work goes into each one,
yes, Absolutely.
And how long their lifespans are.
Yes.
It's just, it is hard, and it's an interesting thing to really slow down and take the time that something needs. And, that again, just always seeing that Montessori process throughout this whole endeavor. We launched, and the reason we did was because we started to get a lot of teachers who were like, hey, these are really cool. Can we have these for our classrooms? And we were kind of like, oh, okay. And our first big customer was Chicago Public Library, which was super exciting. So that was a really crazy time. It was like my last semester, and I was building them all myself in the wood shop, like pulling all-nighters, sanding, and they broke, and of course. But that was really great because expanding unexpectedly into the public libraries was really cool because it was trying to understand what are those connections from the Montessori classroom, which are so specific. And so, the interaction is very much controlled, and you don't have that in the same way. And so that's when we started to develop children's books that accompany the materials, and those ended up being really popular in the Montessori classroom.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been kind of our first introduction into getting into these spaces. And so we're in, probably over around 100 schools and public libraries.
Wow.
Country, and also some abroad. And so it's been really exciting, I think, because that first, kind of like what you described, or you were asking about when you first put those materials in the classroom, and some worked out and some didn't. At this point, I was still a little uncertain that they were actually going to work. And then when they did, and then when they resonated so strongly with teachers and with children, and that they were all very excited about it, it was just really, it was the greatest feeling ever.
Oh, I bet. Oh, that's so cool. And so much work goes into this, and you're literally making them and then.
Right. Of course, I don't make them anymore, thankfully, so they don't fall apart.
But at first, that's so much of you, and then to see somebody positively respond to it, that's so cool. So is it just designed for primary, or is it going into elementary classrooms yet?
Going into elementary as well. I mean,
wow.
We think about what, and this is kind of a big question, something that was so inspiring about Montessori is how do you lay the foundation for future skills and things that you layer on and that you understand later, and, kind of come to maybe in middle school, high school as an adult, and realize that you already sort of have that sensorial framework in your mind. And so it's just kind of looking at how we break down things like language and reading and writing and math, but we don't have the same for some of these other skills like computational thinking. And so part of that is how can we build that foundation, but also have some sort of bridge that gets us a little bit further. So I think we have these interesting materials that have been very successful in 3 to 6. And sort of the goal with a lot of these materials, like the Montessori materials, is that they can exist also in the lower elementary. But, the interaction changes. We layer on more complexity. We adopt more language to associate with the concepts. And so it's trying to find those materials that can progress with the child and can also exist in lower elementary. But I will say the next materials we're hoping to launch soon are a great fit for 6 to 9.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Cause I just think of, my experiences with elementary. So that's why I ask, but, they're so curious about everything, and they can really take some information and critically think about it in the way that, a child in the first plane of development, they're just not there yet. And so I think that's so cool. And I remember in my own experience, we had a computer in the classroom, but it was one computer tucked away. We literally never used it.
Yeah.
But it would have been so nice to have something to explain why that computer is there, why, the why, because I think they just wanted to look at it and touch it and type and stuff, but to understand why we use these machines, why they're important, how they work, that they use the language, that's so cool. I think that is super applicable to the elementary age. And I love that it's going in there too, because I know that stuff sticks with them. I remember there's the pink tower in the primary classroom. Mm-hmm. So it is the same as the cubing material in the elementary classroom. And I'll never forget the day 2 of my 9-year-olds figured that out. And I just thought they were going to explode because they'd been in Montessori since they were 2.5, working with the pink tower, and then transitioning all the way to working with cubing. And then they were like, wait a minute.
You see the connections.
Just seeing that, and it was just about, the materials looked the same and they kind of put it together. But that is so meaningful because then you start to understand and see the world in those specific ways. And you know that everything has a deeper meaning. So that is awesome.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's really the hope here, is that we can break something down so that it's no longer this mysterious black box, but that we understand the concepts behind it. And so much what we see with computer science education today is just facilitating children to be like really good at using computers. And they already are, they're digital natives. They got it.
And computers are not hard to use. Like, that's the thing I get. Like, it kills me. I'm like,
they get easier every day.
Every day they get easier, especially with like iPads and iPhone. I mean, they're designed to be user friendly,
right?
Like, that's their purpose.
Right. And that's, almost like a fault, because you end up not maybe understanding exactly what those concepts are that enable it to do the things that you want it to do. And I think the hope here is that, knowing that technology is such a huge part of our lives and a powerful tool, we don't necessarily want all of our young children, coding on an iPad when they're 4 years old. What we want is for them to understand some big ideas that can be applied to the specific hardware that we have, but can also be used to create new systems that haven't even been developed yet. Sure. So if we really want to think about them being, powerful contributors in the future, rather than just good at, doing these simple things, then it's really about that framework.
That's so meaningful too. And that's really, a lot of the stuff with Montessori, it's a jumping off point. It's how do we get you to a deeper level of this, rather than just teaching you what you need to know.
Right.
That's fantastic. Oh, cool. Well, I will link all this stuff to Learning Beautiful below in the show notes, but is there anywhere else our listeners can find Learning Beautiful?
Yeah, I think the website's a great place to start. There's also a bunch of free activities we started doing during the pandemic.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We call them Learning at Home. And we release them less frequently now, but they're just fun Montessori inspired activities that you can do with things you have at home. You don't need anything. You don't have to buy anything. But try to take those concepts and make it physical. Oh,
I love that. Well, this has been so fun to talk about, this amazing new space in Montessori. I really think that if Maria Montessori was here today, she would have totally been creating computer science materials. I really do, because
I hope so.
She took a look at the world around her and she brought it to the classroom. That was like what she did. And she did it so well. So I just think it's so exciting and so cool, and so glad we got to chat about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being interested in it.
Oh yeah, totally.